Hello. So I thought I would do another live video this evening, even though I have already done one. And yeah. So I am having a cherry Pepsi. And sitting at a vanity. Which is pretty entertaining to me right now. I'm really tired. And I'm about to hopefully get a couple hours of sleep before tomorrow's dental appointment. Trying to keep my nerves from getting racked up right now. They're just all over the place, and so it is to be expected. Let's see. Nothing of I've been reading a bunch today, in the past couple days. I mean, I just read a bunch in general, but, nothing is, nothing really too interesting, has manifested with it. It's just the same information, repeated over and over again, so, there's periods of times where I'll go through, sometimes even weeks to months, on the topics that I read and stuff, where I don't, see any kind of new information whatsoever. It's just the same stuff repeated over and over and over again. So, depending on where I'm at my my time and what I'm doing, sometimes I'm just and sometimes it annoys me. Some of the stuff, some of it's rage baiting. Some people will, repeat the same stuff over and over and, rage bait. So, that's where you don't read tabloid, news, websites and stuff. Don't do that. So, but usually if enough tabloids will print something at a time, something happens and, you'll see it pop up, something in, actual news, something will happen, on things that are, semi-logical, not aliens per se, but, medical issues and stuff. One thing I was thinking about, some of the stuff with my dad I was talking about in my video before. One thing that was always really interesting, with my parents is that in between, the stuff that, happened with me and stuff, and how traumatic everything was and all that, as a person, as a female, and, it's funny, I was definitely given the personality and the mind and the means to, not means, but, the mind and the personality, to, have done all kind of different things. Unfortunately, my dad he got sick. He got diabetes when I was about 10 years old, and he was sick when I was a little kid, I remember. And so that was pretty much his whole life. But so he wasn't able to, his idea was not able to be fruitful on because he did a lot of preaching to me about the type of person I should be. And how to be a good person. And, how the world works. And he had a pretty balanced, fair opinion about stuff, and, in his, vocabulary. And, he was really social. He was, normal, chilled out. But he, was bipolar. So, that was a lot different than me. And we did not butt heads, but I guess in some ways, there's hair on the floor. I can't stand that. Anyways, so we didn't particularly butt heads because my dad was like an intelligent person and valued, intelligence, and I'm also, and was a very, very, very thoughtful person. Very much so. So, we didn't per se butt heads or energy, but there was always an underlying, weirdness, something going on, that was hard to understand. So, by, me having the medical conditions that I have and my childhood and stuff like that, the problem is, and how all this came to be, is because of the uneducatedness of people with mental illnesses. And that is a lot different now with the internet. That kind of, that world no longer exists. The education currently is, it's not anywhere super positive, but it's still a completely different situation now than what it used to be in the 80s and in the 70s. And, so, and that is, purely education kind of thing. Some people live hard though, and I don't mean like drugs. Some people live hard, and my dad did. He was always going, always doing, always creating tons of different projects, tons of different hobbies, really, a lover, a thinker, he was super, super funny sometimes. I mean, he was funny, but he had he was super funny and super intelligent, but he also, was super, he had, some self-esteem issues. So, he was a child of the military, and they moved around a good bit with when he was growing up and stuff. So, yeah. But I straightened my hair and put some heat protector in it, and actually it's not like all crazy static, and it's kind of nice. But one of the things that my dad did go like was there for, and the other women in my early women in my family always really supported was my femininity, and always appreciated that. I mean, I was born with girl parts, and I didn't really care so much until I became a teenager, and then I was like, I want to be a girl. That is what resonates with me. I happen to have a girl body. And my family has always been very supportive of that. So one of the things that comes along with autism spectrum disorder is having an adult disorder when you're a little kid. It goes away. It's just something that happens because of how your brain is set up and stuff, like your medical, like your neurological system, and like medically, like the sensitivity of it, and the proneness towards like several disorders. But it's like, so when you're a kid, you have borderline personality disorder, which is an adult disorder. It is something that happens to people. Like, it is a normal disorder, and it's really serious, and it's really, really overdiagnosed. Borderline personality disorder is diagnosed when it's present. And if some of my friends know that they didn't get a diagnosis, that my friends that do have borderline personality disorder diagnoses are not people who have a diagnosis when they were 20 years old, when they're 30 years old. My friends are being diagnosed with something that I was diagnosed with and went through for about 10 years growing up, and when they're 40. So, and I went through that as a kid, and that is an adult, like I said, an adult disorder, because it has to do with your functioning level, and your responsibility level and stuff like that. And people like, so some of the parts of borderline personality disorder are and I mean, it's a traumatic thing. Like, my friends that have gone through it, like, as an adult and stuff, like, I know a couple people that are female that they have had some really traumatic experiences back to back to back as adults. And they had ADHD when they were younger. They had a proneness to a personality disorder and stuff. And then the personality disorder kicks in, like, is something you know, like you can't control all that stuff anymore. So it is a specific feeling, situation, working like disorder. BPD is. It's not a situation like any other medical condition that's like, oh, I have these traits, that's what this is, you know. It's like, no, there's actually a set like experience that's going on in the inside with some like with personality disorders and stuff. And it's pretty gruesome and stuff. So the interesting thing is that like all the other disorders that I have had, situations with an narcolepsy and the proneness towards epilepsy and the Tourette's and stuff like that, when it's full blown, when I'm actually ticking, not when I'm just being having and I'm not talking about some muscle spasms or like habits, you know. There are set like it's very similar to a gelastic seizure. Tourette's tics are like, it's not any, it's a you know, that's something that I do have done probably like 10 times in the last like 3 months, and that is a tic. There's been a couple different situations, but I'm not normally like, I've never been through that. Like, I have all the other stuff, like I deal with the coprolalia thing. It's not regular. Sometimes in my life it has gone back and forth and all over the place and stuff. But there's been times like after it's attached to you know, that's what they call, like, that is the inhibited state that I was trying to talk about the other night. Actually, it was Valentine's Day out in front of the radio room in my vehicle the other day, about how there's a state and a difference, and it's very reminiscent of like the coprolalia situation in that part and the Tourette's and stuff. And that is very similar to the borderline personality disorder thing that I experienced when I was a kid, the coprolalia. You know, it could be a situation where they were just happening at once, and so they might be connected, that whole pathway and how the personality disorders work and stuff. So that's kind of interesting, because like the biggest part of having autism spectrum disorder and the whole situation boils down to having a situation where you don't know who the fuck you are, like for the first, like, you know, 20 years of your life. I mean, you do, but like there is a definite mismatch in your identity and your working identity and stuff like that. But at the same time, you have healthy mechanics. Like, you don't have the knowledge of a personality disorder, so you don't have a personality disorder. So, but what that is the coprolalia part of Tourette's. And I have never had, that I know of, full coprolalia Tourette tics until the last 2 years. Since I went into status epilepticus 2 years ago. Before that, I did not have, and that is nothing. I'm not saying they weren't there before. It's just, you know, it's like a square of like 50 little bitty squares, and that's just like one missing, so it's a situation where it hadn't, completely fruited. um so but when I was a child, I had would go back and forth between I would have coprolalia episodes, and they are borderline personality disorder episodes. Like, you don't have borderline personality disorder. So, underneath the diagnosis for autism, on another diagnosis, the next diagnosis, a different disorder, is a childhood anxiety disorder. And it is where somebody ends up like, they have borderline personality disorder. And that is a person that is like, on the personality disorder spectrum. And it is known as Asperger's. That has absolutely nothing to do with autism. The thing is that when a person experiences coprolalia, they automatically have an experience that goes along with it that has to do with empathy. And Asperger's is a disorder of empathy. And so you can get your attention when you've got your attention going back and forth between, something happening that you can't control, like a motor tic, especially in a vocal way, like something that is like, sound, that travels. And then you automatically, as a tic, experience emotional reaction to that. And, because it's a tic, it, funny enough, is literally like a spaced out situation. It's very similar to a very mild temporal lobe seizure, which is what I had when I was, the breakthrough seizures that I had to be, not the status epilepticus, but the one that I had to go and take an antipsychotic for the borderline person, or not, the bipolar medication for, was a temporal lobe epilepsy. And that is exactly where coprolalia, affects you as your emotions and memory and stuff like that. So that is Tourette's. The coprolalia thing happens, is like it's a behavior thing. There's lots of different ways that people have weird, like, behavior things, and I'm not talking about moving with your hands, but like movements, and like how people process things. Like ADHD is got a wide, like, it has, a set of symptoms, but that was, completely different. And all kind, in everyone and stuff. So that is how coprolalia works. It is a movement disorder. And it is, I'll have to look it up. I'm not 100% sure all the terminology on it, but, it is attached to a movement disorder. But yeah, it's coprolalia and the echo phenomena and stuff like that, are really big. Like, people don't understand, looking on paper, you know. They know that it's attached to it, but at the same time, like, they don't. But, you know, like, if you, I mean, it's the same thing with the gelastic seizure. When I had a gelastic seizure, the first one that I had that I know that I had when I was older, and I've told this story a bunch of times, I had somebody sitting in front of me at a picnic table, and a boy, and he kissed me, and I laughed in his face, and it freaked me the fuck out. We all sat there real quiet for a while. Nobody said anything. I didn't know what happened. You know, I didn't know what that was, like, why that happened, like, why I was just, and I was like, I mean, there was nothing to laugh at, like, it just happened. So, you know, but that, it was embarrassing, and I had feelings about it and stuff, probably strongly, you know, but like, the coprolalia is a really hard to distinguish state. It's not as cut and dry as a seizure is. So coprolalia is a phenomenon that happens, and there is a change in the way, in your point of view, on subjects that you were just, you know, familiar with and stuff. And as a kid experiencing something like that, you really don't, like, know what's going on. Like, if you're drawing a picture and you start experiencing, like, coprolalia in the middle of, like, explaining something or designing something, things may get a little weird. That can also happen just in the middle of, like, talking about something. You know, you could be laying in bed at night and all of a sudden experience coprolalia. And, you know, so coprolalia can cause you to have internally feel like you have multiple personalities. You don't have multiple personalities because you realize that you're having neurological events, because you know, like, what happened right before it happened. So that whole struggle looks like borderline personality disorder. Because of what borderline personality disorder is, it is borderline personality disorder, because you are dealing with really, like, intense trauma, like emotional trauma over and over, like, you know, the roaring sea, but, you know, before a storm, like pounding on the rocks kind of thing. You are the rocks. So that sucks. But you also, you know, can look around you and look at other people and see how they react to stuff, and then look at you and watch your pattern of events and know that something's going on. So, like, you know, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that when you are, you know, a couple clowns short of a circus. So, I had to get it. And you can't see the one I was looking earlier. It's gone and flat. So yeah, that is, I don't even know if I'm saying it right. Coprolalia. That is so, like, that shit, like, how much I have worked through emotionally in the past, like, 4 or 5 years to get from where I was to where I am now is insane. Like, and have pieced it all together visually and stuff. I have overcome a whole lot. I have walked every inch of the way. And that is due to the nature of the disorder itself. Because my symptoms got really out of hand. And so not only was I dealing with all the crazy symptoms, but I had to figure out, had just been giving, funny enough, had just realized what was going on. And then, have been able to, finally science it down to, experience, and brought it up to date in the modern era of 2026, rather than living in 1960. So, yeah, that happens. So I am super thankful to have the terminology that I do to know what the experiences are. I still have not completely gone through all the therapy and stuff, of knowing, I still experience some things right now. For long periods of time in my life, I didn't have any kind of symptoms. I did, it of course is still there and stuff, but everything got really out of hand, back and forth through my 30s. So, I had all these things to organize together to be able to figure it out. But it's really crazy though to look at the definitions and the way people try to explain autism, and it's because of how it was recorded in original in text and stuff, for medical manuals and stuff like that, and people trying to logic it out, the Cinderella shoe, and put the shoe on and it doesn't fit, and it's that's really amazing. I think I'm gonna stop this. No, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna post that. I thought about it. I was I want to now make something with having to do with the Cinderella shape, and I'm just gonna stop that idea and go take a nap before I get this tooth out of my head. I just it's so crazy that what I'm seeing in the news and all the articles that are so terribly written. I mean, it's just people losing their freaking minds. It's really crazy. I can't believe it's being printed. Can't believe nobody's questioning it. I can't believe there's no articles of people talking about that and questioning it. It's really scary, actually. But not any more scary than other stuff that pops up in the news and whatnot. But it still is that's not gonna end well. I don't know what's gonna happen with the autism thing, but that's not gonna end well. So, but yeah. Because anybody who's ever experienced, knows, what, phenomenon kind of situations are that are, the medical, phenomenon situations, that are neurological and stuff, like that is the part that doesn't match up with the behavioral diagnosis, like the cold definition of autism spectrum disorder. Those are the two maths that don't connect. They are kind of like, yeah. So, yep. All right. Hope everybody has a good night.